mo sa kiss ni ma'am?
Of course!
Kami pa? Ako dili magtuon? Ikaw yun ato? Ikaw?
Nagtuon po, dako pa.
Uwe!
Sige Dabi, unsa man ko na ang reflective practice daw ko na ba?
Unsa man ko ng daily lesson log, unsaon man ko na pagbuhat be.
Ang electronic class record.
Ang progress chart, unsaon man na.
Sige na, ikaw, unsa man?
Pero dako ana.
Reflection is the process of thinking about what you do and why you do it. It's a way of analysing the things that you do and challenging your existing beliefs or assumptions in order to learn from a situation. Do you ever find yourself replaying the events of the day in your head? Whether it's going through a conversation that happened, thinking about a sequence of events that led to a certain conclusion, or thinking about how you felt or reacted at a point in time. At this level, we are quite used to the idea of reflecting on our own actions. However, there is a difference between reflective thinking and reflective practice, and that reflective practice is a deliberate way of thinking about experiences in order to learn from them. Reflective practice is a way of continuously learning new knowledge, skills and behaviours, whilst testing them out during our everyday actions. In this way, it's closely linked to the concept of learning from experience, by thinking about what you did, what happened, and deciding what you would do differently next time. Lots of different people have written about reflective practice over the years, which has led to a variety of different models and theories. You may have come across some of these. One of the first people to write about reflective practice was John Dewey, who defined reflective practice as the active, persistent and careful consideration of any belief or supposed form of knowledge in the light of the grounds that support it. In practice, this means having a questioning approach, considering why things are as they are and thinking about how they could be different. Some key features of reflection include: it helps us to be conscious of our potential for bias and discrimination. It encourages us to look at issues from different perspectives, which help us to scrutinise our own values and assumptions. It helps us to avoid past mistakes and challenges in order to improve our practice. It maximises our opportunities for learning. It's an active process of learning, which involves more than thinking or thoughtful action. Reflection helps us to prevent our skills from becoming out of date, and it's a cyclical process where reflection leads to the development of new ideas, which are then used to plan the next stages of learning. You will all have different levels of experience in using reflective practice within your role. Some of you may be teaching reflective practice to learners as part of their apprenticeship programmes, whilst for others the term may be relatively new. It doesn't matter what your starting point is. Everyone will have a unique experience of using reflective practice, all of which are important and will form a good basis for building on as you complete this module. A key aim of the module is to provide you with the opportunity to learn from experience how valuable reflective practice can be in supporting you in your role and your career moving forward.
Using learner attainment data, a measure of teaching effectiveness. Let us take a look at the different documents that teachers can use to monitor learners' performance. First is a daily lesson log, or the DLL. The DLL shows the lesson for each day with the index of mastery computed accurately. The index of mastery contains the learner attainment data that measure the learner's mastery level of the competency. It guides the teachers in their instruction and allows them to determine whether the learners are ready to proceed to the next lesson. Second is the electronic class record, or the ECR. This is another document that teachers use to monitor and evaluate the learner's progress and achievement. The electronic class records, including the grading sheet and the summary of quarterly grades, allows the teachers to monitor individually the learner's attainment data per specific learning area and assess whether the learners passed or failed.
One is the progress chart. The teacher also uses a progress chart to monitor his or her learners' progress quarterly based on a class average. The chart helps him or her to have a general assessment of his or her learners' progress and to design activities appropriate to their level of proficiency. These forms, particularly the DLL and the ECR used by the teachers, are provided by the school. Templates are also available for download in DepEd websites.
Hoy, kamu bitaw, hindi na dyan yung natabi, hindi dyan kong gibiyaan.
Ay, ito din.
Diba na magsakot ta, kay magkuan ta sa mo report ka sa graduate. Ikaw, ato ka sa boarding house ha. Oo, kasi magkuan ka.
Ugma na lang.
Basta kay bato ka dito mga kuan. Mga 10:30 yan na.
Sige, doon lang tayo magbahit.
Bahit na magamatag PPT dito.
Wala ay, guban na lang, napauli.
Kuan.
Mauri yan, mabuta. Ay guys, ako'y chika ninyo.
Sama na.
Kuan, about ato ni...
Unya na na chika ninyo big, problema bataan ning ato ang kuan ni Sir Balbena. Unya na ato sa ning bahino ning ato report
na
ni Sir.
po, doy. Bago lang taga-report gahapon. Mag-report na po ta.
Oh, yan.
Kini dire sa kuan, permiro, sa taman dire, ay dire na lang. Kini sa other ways of evaluating
Kinsa
learning
na?
achievement. Ima na lang niya lipat.
Oh, sige.
Okay, kini. Saban siya, ikaw ani or ako?
Ako na lang.
Ikaw, gikan ka sa item analysis to diri sa kuan, sa voluntary. Tin ako na dayon sa kinalasan sa supervisors as evaluators of teaching dayon diri sa kuan, iyahang mga murag parts taman sa walk.
Tagsa-tagsa na taga magpipiti ha. Kaya na. Bahala mo.
Pagtagsa jud to.
Kita daw ko kay wako kasabot. Mag-search ko.
Dara ang kuan o.
Saan man ipagkuan, oy? I-search mo kay mag-search pug ko.
Ay isend na lang ako ang picture nga akong gikuanan sa libro ni sir. Ako may gakuan. Oh, dara.
Sige, mag-search pug ko.
Mag-search sa food ko.
Next day, the next day, the next day.
Good afternoon, everyone. And for today, we are going to discuss about the other ways of evaluating learners' achievement, reflected practice through performance evaluation, students as evaluators, and peer as evaluators, and concrete examples of peer as evaluator. First is other ways of evaluating learners' achievement. Here are the other ways of determining how a learner outcomes attained by learners. First is the item analysis. Second is the frequently table with mean score, standard deviation, and mean percentage. The third one is the reflective practice through performance evaluation. Ang item analysis, frequency table with mean score, standard deviation, and mean percentage at reflective practice through performance evaluation ay mahalagang kasangkapan sa mga pagsusuri na gaganap ng mga mag-aaral at guro. Ginagamit ang item analysis upang tiyakin ang bias ng mga tanong at pagsusulit, habang ang frequency table with mean score ay nagpapakita ng distribusyon ng mga score. Ang standard deviation mean percentage ay sumusukat sa pagkakaiba-iba ng mga resulta at pangkalahatang pagganap. Samantala, ang reflective practice through performance evaluation ay tumutulong sa patuloy na pag-unlad sa pagtuturo at pagkatuto sa pamamagitan ng pagsusuri at pagninilay-nilay sa mga magiging resulta.
How can we determine correct and faulty test items? How do we ensure test effectiveness and fairness? How can we improve the quality of the test? To answer these questions, let's discuss item analysis. But before that, welcome to Assessment and Evaluation with Teacher Lay. Don't forget to click the like, share, and subscribe button. Dylan William, a British educationalist and emeritus professor of educational assessment at the UCL Institute of Education, once stated,
"If our students learned what we taught, we would never need to assess. It is only through assessment that we can discover whether the instructional activities in which we engage our students resulted in the intended learning. Assessment really is the bridge between teaching and learning."
For that purpose, educators give various assessments such as tests, quizzes, and exams to gain insights about their academic standing. Through examinations, educators can identify specific learning problems and gaps to do something about them. It offers answers to questions such as 1. Which topics are students struggling with? 2. Is a particular question as difficult, complex, or rigorous as you intend it to be? 3. Do students really know the answer or just applying test-taking strategies to eliminate the wrong answers? 4. Which items should be eliminated or revised before use in subsequent test administrations? 5. Does the item do an excellent job of separating students who know the content from those who may merely guess the correct answer? One way to increase visibility into student learning gaps is via item analysis. What is item analysis? Item analysis is a statistical technique that is used for selecting and rejecting the items of the test based on their difficulty value and discriminated power. Item analysis provides evidence that a test measures what it is supposed to measure and produces consistent results. Reviewing item quality helps ensure that educators obtain the best possible information to make instructional decisions. Basically, item analysis reveals 1. Items that are too easy or too difficult. 2. Items that failed to show the difference between skilled and unskilled examinees. 3. Items that are scored incorrectly. In addition, Hetzel stated that when norm reference tests are developed for instructional purposes, to assess the effects of educational programs, or for educational research purposes, it can be essential to conduct item and test analyses. These analyses can evaluate the quality of items and the test as a whole. Such analyses can also be employed to revise and improve both items and the test as a whole.
So, aking ipagpapatuloy, next is student as evaluators, making student evaluators meaning. So, what is this? Kapag sinabi natin making student evaluators meaningful, nangangahulugan ito na ang pagganap ng mga estudyante bilang mga tagapagtasa ay hindi lamang isang formalidad, kundi isang makabuluhang proseso. By involving students as evaluators, school can develop purposely, impacting an authentic assessment of classes, school, teacher, and in accountability and ownership for all participants in the learning process. Making per evaluation of teaching work. Ito ay isang uri ng pagsusuri ng pagganap na sinasagawa ng isa o higit pang mga tao na may parehong kakayahan o kompetensya. Isinasagawa ang pamaraang ito upang mapanatili ang kalidad at trabaho sa nais na antas at mapabuti ang produktibidad at pagganap.
We want to help each other excel at what we love. How do we do this? Let's explore it. So, first of all, as we consider this, I want you to bear some things in mind. You want to really understand what is the purpose in providing this peer evaluation. Now, you could just say, you know what, I got to race through these areas of improvement. I need to berate the person. I need to point out areas in which they're, falling short and how they can improve and what the expectations are and what will happen if they don't and so forth. Okay, fine. If that's what you're going to do, good luck. Or we can look at it as talking shop with a respected colleague. Remember, these are peer evaluations. You're not their boss. You're not their, higher up or anything like that. You're peers, and you both belong to a professional community of learning. And we want to approach this as us learning together and practicing continuous improvement as a community, okay? Furthermore, you really need to understand that we have, as a core need, a need for validation. We are constantly evaluating and scanning the environment for either validation or threats to our self-esteem or domains of self-worth, and we are looking for validation that we are on the right path. And so it's by validating what we're doing and then validating one another's desire to improve, it's by doing this that we're going to get the very best results. Remember, your coworkers are intrinsically motivated and experts in their field. They want to do well. That's why they're engaging in this peer evaluation with you. They want to continuously improve. That doesn't mean they want to be berated. They want to figure out where can they do better still. And so all of this means that calling into question their expertise or challenging their domain of self-worth will not have the desired outcome, okay? It's not about managing people and management by exception and setting expectations and none of that. It's about us exploring personal and professional development together in a way that validates and supports our domain of self-worth. Okay, so with that in mind, let's start. Prepare before you evaluate, right? Your performance measures should be documented and available. So whatever measurements you're using, they should be the ones that are included in employee handbooks or in HR manuals or in professional guides or what have you. If you're working with peers in a professional environment, odds are there are some documented expectations on what makes an effective practitioner in this field versus what makes somebody who needs to improve in some areas. And so you want to really make sure that you're citing the true expectations of any particular professional field. You especially want to avoid subjective feedback that is not aligned with documented performance measures. Listen, you have opinions, I have opinions, we all have opinions, but opinions are like belly buttons. You know what? We've all got one, and at the end of the day, they're pretty useless. I want to know what the expectations are and how well am I meeting those expectations. So before you observe somebody in a peer evaluation to perform that evaluation, make sure you know what you're looking for and what you're measuring. Next thing is, when you are delivering the evaluation, share best practices from credible sources. You really want to direct them to helpful and valuable resources that will, in fact, add value to whatever it is they're trying to do. Telling someone that they have opportunities for improvement, then offering them no resources by which they can realize those opportunities is not doing them any favors. I can't stress this enough. I like to be pointed out, hey,
Akala nyo tapos na, meron pa. So bakit nga ba ang evaluation sa pagtuturo ay binubuo sa pagsusuri ng pagganap ng pagtuturo ng mga kasamahan, karaniwang sa parehong disiplina? Gaya ng sinabi ni England, 1996, ang peer evaluation ang mga mahusay na guro na naglalayong magsaliksik sa kanilang sariling gawain. Tinutukoy ang mahalagang isyu na nais nilang talakayin, nagtatakda ng mga tanong para sa kanilang mga sarili, nag-iimbestiga ng mga alternatibo at nagsusubok ng bagong bagay at ginagawa ang lahat ng ito kasama ang mga kapwa-guro na makapagbigay ng puna at suporta. Ito naman ito ay ang concrete examples of peer evaluators. Una ay ang pagsusuri ng mga guro sa kanilang mga kapwa-guro. Pangalawa, ang pag-isipan ng mga lesson plans. Pangatlo, collaborative teaching observation. Pang-apat, pagbibigay ng feedback sa mga instructional videos. Panglima, pagsusuri ng mga proyekto o gawain ng mga mag-aaral. At ang pang-anim ay ang monitoring programs. Ito ay nagpapakita kung paano nagiging epektibo ang peer evaluation sa pagtulong sa pagpapabuti ng kalidad ng guro at pagganap ng edukasyon.
Well, self-evaluation has to go on all the time. Like, there's no better tool for student or professor than reflection. It's part of our process. In fact, in the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, very early we've learned that there's reflection in practice and reflection on practice. And it's the reflection on practice that strengthens us later, and the reflection in practice that makes us better in the classroom. So reflection, self-evaluation, very, very important for students and professors.
I think the important thing in self-assessment becomes the kinds of questions you are placing in the self-assessment. What are the markers that you're placing in there?
There are a lot of times where self-evaluation is very useful, and perhaps as a reflective practice exercise. So often, it's pretty standard now that faculty will use the discussion boards in some format where they'll be having a conversation between either small groups or the entire class. But the real power can come at the end where the student can evaluate how they contributed to that discussion. And so doing some kind of peer evaluation, not just necessarily ticking off things on a rubric, but sort of saying, how did I contribute to the discussion? How did I change the conversation? And that can be an assessment in itself that they could submit.
Well, self-evaluation is a process of developing that metacognitive awareness of, so what's involved here? And I think that's crucial for students to develop an idea of what are you expecting? And it creates a conversation then about the kind of evaluation that will go on in the course.
An example of this might be you have a larger project or a large essay, and maybe you require students to submit something, but as part of submission they also go through and fill in the rubric for themselves. Now, you might not assign a large grade for that, but it could be a pass-fail sort of thing, where did they provide feedback, or did they reflect on it in a way that shows that they've actually considered their work and identified some areas that they need to work on.
Peer assessment does something. I like to think of it this way. When I thought of it this way, it kind of blew my mind a little bit. We have all these students doing something. We give them all a task. In the typical situation, they all do their own, they submit it, it goes away. Eventually, months later, they get it back with some comments. Meanwhile, there's this sea of other responses to that same question that's all around them, that it's a powerful source of information. So I think by allowing students to see what their peers have done, and in fact, I like to actually ask them very explicitly to assess that work, to point out, if possible, ways in which it could be improved. So you can use peer assessment in a way that builds community as well, by saying your task here is, yes, to find something that's not optimal, but also to suggest a way this can be changed that will make it better than it currently is.
For the statistics MOOC, we also took advantage of peer assessment capabilities, and so that we had the opportunity to have students write responses to questions about some results. They have some analysis of some data so that they could actually demonstrate their levels of statistical thinking, what they could and couldn't say based on the results of the statistical analyses, what the strengths and limitations were of the analyses and the conclusions that they could draw. And again, that was peer assessed. which I thought was a really good tool. And of course, students learn a lot also by going through the peer assessment process and by reading what their peers wrote and thinking about how that relates to the rubric and how it perhaps relates to their own response. And their statistical thinking skills just develop further through that process.
The students are required to develop within their groups their own specific rubric for how they are grading one another. And part of that is also a learning process because some of the students will identify marks associated for participation. And I have to pull out of them what participation actually means so that they can assign an appropriate value to someone who's showing up and doing work, and someone who's showing up and doing excellent work. So peer evaluation is definitely used. It's, I think for the most part it's been good because it's helped identify which students haven't been contributing, and their grade is adjusted by their peers, essentially.
So what I tell them throughout the term is that we're going to have peer assessment at the end. I show them the first week of class, what it's going to be based on, which in essence is asking what percentage of the work in the group did each person do. So if you have a 4-person group and you're answering about the other 3, generally you'd like to see 33%, 33%, 33% is the answer to that question. I also ask on a 7-point scale, how engaged was each of the others in your group in each week, and how well prepared were they. And incidentally, I don't ask in comparison to others. I just ask on an absolute scale.
Peer evaluation is another way to get students to be involved in the evaluative process. If you want to be strategic about it, it can actually reduce your workload if you set it up well. But you have to help students get to a place where they can do this effectively. And that can mean that you set out a framework for that, or you have a discussion where you co-create that framework. This peer evaluation can be formative or it can be summative. I prefer formative because it's much more lower stakes, and you're getting feedback on the process as opposed to the notion of this is going to be towards my grade, what my colleague thinks. So I have used it that way, and I don't think it's wrong. You could partition it that way, but I think it's much more effective if you use peer evaluation formatively. And what you're doing there is that, on the one hand, it makes it look like the emphasis is on the information that the one learner is getting. But in fact, the whole process is one of metacognitive development, where they're starting to understand that these are the criteria, if you go back to the notion of some fundamental ideas of outcome-based education and using rubrics, you want to bring the students into that process. And how do you do that? Well, peer evaluation.
Claro que may ron, no?
Evaluation matters because you can't expect if you don't inspect. Teachers don't like it. No one does. But if we don't evaluate and we don't work with you on improving instruction, improving the strategies, and giving great feedback on how can you do that, then we're going to do the same thing for the next 20 years that we've done for the last 20 years. Where was the feedback that helped me grow or become better? I am the supervisor of evaluation programs in Lincoln County. The position I have is extremely important to me because I was a teacher. My heart is with teaching and with students. I am able to solve problems for teachers and help them with curriculum choices. So most of the time, I'm just building a repertoire really of strategies to help them in their classroom to be better in the classroom. And so I would say 90% of my post-conferences are really positive. Sometimes in those classes, then we have to have some more difficult conversations. One of the ways that makes it easier is when you're working with teachers, you focus on what you saw. It's not about a person. It's not about them as a person. It's not about me as a person. It's about the instruction in that classroom. And that's the conversations we have. So many of the times, it's the teacher that will walk into the post-conference, sit down and say, Ms. Pryor, and they start telling me everything that went wrong in that lesson, and I have to build them back up. No, that wasn't true. That's not, let's talk about the lesson itself. Don't worry about the negative. Well, I'm not here just to give a number to what they're doing to their teaching. I'm here to support them and give feedback and then offer them help if they need help, and then also offer them praise. There's a lot of
A lot of really great things happening in our classroom. And
Now let's proceed to the tools for instructional supervision. The Department of Education cites various forms used by school administrators, supervisors, and classroom supervision.
Instructional supervision support intervention strategies. In addition to instructional supervision and in support of teachers improved teaching, which is part of continuing professional development, the Department of Education offers the following job embedded learning strategies.
Study groups. This is a study group of teachers interested in collegial study and actions such as curriculum design and instructional. Sa madaling sabi, ang study group bilang isang instructional supervision support intervention strategy ay isang kolaboratibong pamamaraan kung saan ang mga guro ay nagsama-sama upang pag-aralan at pag-usapan ang mga strategiya sa pagtuturo, lesson plans at iba pang aspeto ng kailangang profesional na pag-unlad.
All right, let's get started. This year we had talked about that we would dig deeper into writing. Last year we had really focused with Frankie Siberson's and Karen Stamuziak's Still Learning to Read, and we also got into Amy Buckner's Notebook Know-How. We've been layering over the last few years, and last spring we talked about digging even deeper, looking at how we wanted to chart out our writing over the year possibly. So that's kind of where we're at. So it's our first meeting this year, and we're using the book When Writing Workshop Isn't Working by Mark Overmeyer and Amy Buckner's Takes.
If you're going to be leading a study group for the first time, I think it's very important to set the environment right off as very welcoming, very comfortable, making sure that they know that, you know, if this isn't, you don't have homework to do, you're doing this because you want to. You want to get better at your teaching. You want to collaborate with your peers. You want to see what's working in other classrooms. You want to be at the cutting edge of all this new research coming out, and you want to try things in your classroom.
So just to get us going, I guess my questions would be where's your thinking right now, and what are your goals this year? You know, where do you want this group to go this year? There's a lot of stuff coming out right now in genre studies and how important genre studies are. On the other hand, Ralph Fletcher's new book, Boy Writers, is coming out, and he's really challenging readers to talk about or think about choice and the lack of choice that we're giving students in school. Mm-hmm. So as these, and Katie Wood Ray's new book is right out about genre studies. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a time to really think about and put it, and there's a balance. Mm-hmm. So I think that's one thing I would like to put forward is to think about, I do think there's an importance of genre studies, but at the same time, I think having a son, I think it's really important that he's given a choice in school.
And that was one thing I'd marked in the book in that first chapter when they had talked about, like, somewhat of a limit, but allowing them to have choices within that limit, you know, still letting them, like, I think about that a few years ago with that boy that he always wanted to write that soccer story. And it was that list, and then we got it to, there was some description in there, and then it was still like, okay, try it. And I kept pushing him out of the soccer story, and now I think back on that after reading everything, that, oh, you know, that's where his passion was at. But I didn't want to hear one more soccer story, you know. So.
Action research. The teacher researchers engage in research to address a problem closely connected to his or her work, especially teaching. Action research gives teachers the skills they need to work on problems specific to student learning. Sa madaling sabi, ang action research ay isang proseso kung saan ang mga guro ay nagsasagawa ng pananaliksik sa kanilang sariling klase upang maunawaan at mapabuti ang kanilang pagtuturo.
Johnson, this is a 4-part series, 4 videos, looking at planning and conducting action research for teacher professional development. If you want to get a hold of me, you can find me there, www.teaching-reading.com. I do have some resources there. So our workshop goal in these 4 videos, to understand what action research is, to know how to conduct action research, and to be able to use action research for professional development. And this is kind of an overview of the things that we will look at. So let's start our journey here. What is action research? Action research is a type of research related to one's professional practice. It could be in education or in any field. Its practitioner research is a systematic process. Systematic is key here. Used to study a school, a classroom, or a teaching learning situation with the purpose to understand what's going on and to improve the quality of instruction. This is action research in an educational system. And it can be a powerful tool, as you'll see, for teacher professional development. It's one of the best ways to link theory and research directly to classroom practice. So, the basics of action research. We'll go over these 7 action research descriptors, and you can see them right there. This acts as kind of an advanced organizer. So let's start with number 1. It's a systematic method used to analyze and evaluate your own teaching practice or to solve a problem. Systematic and orderly are the key words. It is a method. It's pre-planned up front. It is methodical. There is a certain amount of flexibility in how data can be collected and analyzed and presented, more flexible for practitioner use, but you are not conducting an experiment. That's a key difference, and it's often confused there. It is not whatever you think. It's not anything goes. It's not a description or observation of your ideas or an interesting project or unit or strategy that you use, or it's not an explanation of something that worked really well. It's a systematic observation of your own teaching practice. As such, you do not start with the answer. This is an underlying assumption of any type of research. You are an unbiased observer to the greatest extent possible. If you had the answer, you wouldn't be doing the research in the first place. Now, you may think method X is the best way to do something, but you do not conduct research to prove that it's the best way. Instead, you conduct research to understand why method X might be the best way, or to see if method X is effective. There's a difference there, but it should be an honest and unbiased account of what's occurring in the classroom. If it is unbiased to the greatest extent possible, you are a more credible researcher. You are more credible if you can demonstrate that you are unbiased. Action research projects vary in length. They could be very short or a little bit longer, but it's determined by the question, by the type of inquiry, and by the research environment and the parameters of your data collection. These all vary in what is the general purpose of the research project in the first place. Now note that, in general, here are just some general observations. If you're working with undergraduate students, if you're a college instructor, you could do some great little action research projects. Maybe they observe 2 class sessions. All right, that's a very small action research project to see what's going on there, to understand. If you are a teacher, you can do short ones, minimum of 2 weeks for data collection. That's just a rule of thumb, a common idea, an estimate. For professional presentations, academic journals, master's theses, or more formal projects, think about 2 to 9 months for data collection in general. These are just general suggestions. They're not hard, fast rules. However, keep in mind that if your data collection is too short, you create an unrealistic picture, or you run the risk of presenting an unrealistic view of what is occurring in that educational setting.
Peer teaching or coaching. It is a professional development strategy that enables teachers to consult with one another, discuss and share teaching practices that increase student learning, observe one another classrooms, promote collegiality and support, and help ensure quality teaching for all students. Sa madaling sabi, ang peer teaching ay isang estratehiya kung saan ang mga guro ay nagtuturo sa isa't isa upang mapabuti ang kanilang kaalaman, kasaysayan at pamamaraan sa pagtuturo.
Peer teaching is when one learner with advanced knowledge of a particular topic is designated as the tutor and provides instruction and guidance to a fellow learner who is less familiar with the topic, known as the learner. Peer teaching can take many different forms, such as surrogate teaching. This involves giving learners from a higher year group some teaching responsibility for the lower year groups. Proctoring programs. This involves one-to-one tutoring by learners who are slightly ahead of their peers or who have successfully demonstrated proficiency with the material in the recent past. Cooperative learning. This divides classmates into small groups, with each person in the group responsible for teaching the others, each contributing a unique piece to the group performance on a task. Reciprocal peer tutoring. A more specific version of cooperative learning, it groups classmates into pairs to tutor each other. The main benefits of peer teaching include, but are not limited to, the following. Learners receive a more personalised learning experience. Direct interaction between learners promotes active learning. Learners feel more comfortable and open when interacting with a peer. Peers share a similar vocabulary, allowing for greater understanding. Peer teachers reinforce their own learning by instructing others. Research also includes that peer teaching activities help promote team building, supportive learning networks, greater psychological well-being, social competence, communication skills, higher achievement, and greater productivity in terms of enhanced learning outcomes.
Mentoring. It is a supervisory procedure where the instructional supervisor, school head, master teacher, or a teacher who is more skilled helps or guide another teacher for professional growth. Sa madaling sabi, ang mentoring ay isang proseso kung saan isang mas may karanasan at bihasang guro ay gumagabay sa isang bagong guro o nangangailangan upang mapabuti ang kanyang kasanayan sa pagtuturo. Ito ay isang mahalagang estratehiya sa instructional supervision. Dahil nagbibigay ito ng personalized support, patuloy na pagkatuto at professional na unlad sa loob ng paaralan. Conferencing. It is a conference between a school head and teacher after classroom supervision. If correctly employed, it gives each teacher the special help needed to become a proficient in self-analysis, self-appraisal, and self-improvement. Sa madaling sabi, ang conferencing ay isang estratehiya sa instructional supervision kung saan ang supervisor, school head, o mentor ay nakikipulong sa guro upang talakayin ang kanyang pagtuturo, magbigay ng feedback at magplano ng mga hakbang para sa pagpapabuti ng kasanayan.
I'm Lawrence Hudson. This is Curriculum 731, and I will be doing a pre-interview as well as a post-interview with Algebra 1 teacher, Ms. Rashonda Lakes. And I will begin, Ms. Lakes, by first just asking me to tell me a little bit about the lesson that you'll be teaching today.
Today I'll be teaching Objective 2G, which states, one part of it states that we're going to multiply binomials. And in multiplying binomials, do you want me to go more in detail about what we're going to do?
Yes.
Okay. When in multiplying binomials, since they're already very familiar with the distributive property, we're going to focus more on the algebraic approach, which is teaching them how to distribute appropriately, and then talk about the FOR method, incorporate the FOR method in there.
Okay. Now, how does this lesson, or how much of this lesson will be tied into state testing?
All of this lesson is tied into state testing because it is one of our algebra strands, and it is the largest strand that the Algebra 1 state test is comprised of. So all of this lesson will deal with skills that are associated with the state test.
What activities will you be using to conduct this lesson?
I'm going to use something called diagrams. It's really just a puzzle. It's a sheet of paper that is broken into 12 squares, and I build it first of all by just going on and getting problems and answers, and then cutting it cut it up into 12 squares, and then the students have to work the problem and then connect it. And before long, they've got a really good practice, because at that time they will have completed 17 independent and guided practice problems. So that's how we work through it. We work through it in a puzzle in which they'll be in groups of 4.
How many students do you have?
22.
Well, how will you know if the lesson objectives was achieved?
I will know based on how well each student completes, or the number of students that complete that activity. If a student can complete 17 multiplying binomial problems in 50 minutes, that's including the opening and the closing, then I'll know that that lesson was a success.
Okay. Is there anything special about this class, or anything that I might see that I might need to be aware of prior to coming in to observe?
We do have inclusion students in this class, but they will not be isolated. There will be one of each inclusion student will be incorporated into a group. There's also an inclusion teacher in this class, but the inclusion teacher will work with every student just as I will.
What resources will you use other than the puzzle pieces? Will there be any additional resources?
They will be using the TI-83 Plus calculator. And that's it for this lesson, the TI-83 Plus calculator.
All right, is there any other things that you would like to share before I come in to see this lesson? I kind of captured, I got a good idea about the things that will be going on in this lesson. Okay. Is there anything else that you would like to share just about the students and their abilities or anything?
In this class I have a wide range, so I have some students that are advanced students, and then I've already mentioned about the inclusion students, but aside from that we have mid-range students. So in the groups, they will be comprised of a high, 1 inclusion student, and 2 middle students. And there will be quite a bit of talking, because that's one of their responsibilities, to make sure that each student feels as if they're responsible for everybody. So there will be a lot of conversations going on about the math and the math only. So we'll not be quiet.
Okay, well, I'll be back in at it's 5th period now. I'll be back in at the 6th period, and then we'll do the post-conference during planning time at the 7th period. All right.
Walkthrough. Classroom walkthrough is a brief visit to classrooms throughout the school, conducted frequently on an informal or non-evaluate basis designed to collect patterns of data that can help members of the professional learning community to continually improve their teaching practice. Sa madaling sabi, ang walkthrough ay isang mabilis at informal na obserbasyon sa silid-aralan sa isinagawa ng school heads, instructional supervisors o mentors upang masuri ang pangkalahatang kalagayan ng pagtuturo at pagkatuto sa isang paaralan. Dahil ako na kag-score gawin na ako, sir.
Hi guys!
China, karon pa. Bakit mi kanina ni sir? Ay, bisa ka. Nagadamguro-guro ning batahan, sir ba? Nagabilis ka ni sir. Uy, pinakusayo ko ni mata ganina. Bakit ka kung dito na nato gabi? Maotoy ng gawas tanan. Damguro da ito?
Flashback.